Hi, this is attorney Nicole Christie from the Christie Law Firm, where we work hard to make families stronger. So today I want to talk to you about the difference between guardianship and adoption. This is an important distinction that you have to understand because it impacts your rights in different ways. And so if you want to have a future with your child, you have to understand this difference. And so I have two other videos in which you can watch at another time regarding what guardianship means and the types of guardianship and how to get reinstated. But today I want to talk to you about understanding the difference between guardianship in itself and adoption. So guardianship is just a transfer of your rights in terms of where the child lives, who they're going to live with, where they go to school, and the doctors, and who visits with the child. Those rights in and of itself is under guardianship, and so that can be transferred to another person, but your tie to the child is still there. Adoption, on the other hand, legally breaks that tie. It means that you have no say regarding the child's future and what happens to the child. You don't even have a right to see the child unless that particular person gives you the permission. And so even if they don't allow the visitation, there's some very limited areas in which you can actually see a child if they've become adopted. And so with the guardianship, as I explained in our part 2, you can get reinstated as long as it's not permanent. So if you find over time that you've really gotten this together, you still have a relationship with your child, you want to get them back home, it's been a long haul, but you want to get them back home, as long as the guardianship is not permanent, you can do that. You can go to the court and petition. However, adoption is a break in the ties, I explained before. And so once that occurs, once the child has actually been adopted, there's no way to reverse that. And so the first stage before a child is adopted is a termination of parental rights. Now, one of the things you have to understand is that DCF has a legal obligation to make sure that they find a permanent plan for the child. It's not something that's arbitrary. It's literally governed by our federal government. And so DCF has to make sure that there's a permanent plan for the child. A child can't come into foster care and be there for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. That's not going to happen, especially if the child is very young. For example, less than the age of 3. DCF is probably going to give that parent about 9 months to a year to get everything together. Otherwise, they have to pursue a permanent plan. And so if they think that the best plan for the child is adoption, that's something you got to listen for. If they say, we think the child should be adopted, what they're basically saying is, first, we want the parent's rights to be terminated. That means the right to see the child, to ask about the child, to have any hope of reunifying with that child needs to be severed. And that's the termination of parental rights. And so what they'll do at that stage is they'll file a separate petition. It's separate from the neglect petition. It's a whole different case. And they'll file it, and you probably have 1 to 2 court dates. And that last court date is typically a trial on whether or not your rights should be terminated. And you have to understand that the court is at that point focused on the child and not necessarily how you feel or whether it's fair to you. It's really about what is in the best interest of the child. Has the parent done everything they needed to do to fully rehabilitate so that they can get their child back? And so that's why it's really important that you understand at each stage of when DCF is involved with you, what are they doing? What are they recommending? Because your rights as a parent can be affected by that. And so once the termination happens, then that party who has the child, typically the foster parent, they then move to be able to adopt. And so that's a long enough process, but once the termination happens, you're not even involved in the adoption. You don't even know when that is occurring. And so once the adoption happens, it's up to the adoptive parents to say, yeah, I want this to be an open adoption. I have seen where the foster parents are insisting that the parents stay involved and making sure that there are visits after the adoption. And then there are adoptive parents who want nothing to do with the parent. And so you will have lost access to your child permanently. And the only times that I have seen a parent be able to reunify or to have any further contact with the child is when they get to be old, when the child is old enough and says, I want to find my birth parents. I want to know who they are. But that's a long shot. That is something that sometimes happens, is there's no guarantee. And so it's really important that if your case is moving along and it's getting to the 6th month and the 7th month and DCF is not moving towards reunification, you have to understand that the next step could be adoption. The next step could involve terminating your parental rights. And that is permanent. There is no reversal of that unless there's some gross legal error that occurred. So you have to understand that once it happens, once the TPR happens, or termination of parental rights, it's permanent. So keep that in mind when dealing with DCF in your case. Keep that in mind when the children are first removed. Understand that they cannot stay in foster care forever. So do what you have to do. If you feel like you need help, sometimes again, dealing with DCF is not easy, and you need help, reach out and get the help. Get it from an advocate, get it from an attorney, get it from someone, because again, your rights are tied into how DCF handles the case and could be affected towards the end of that case, and it could be negatively affected and permanently affected. So keep those things in mind when dealing with your case. Guardianship is one thing, adoption is another, and you need to understand the distinction. All right, take care and watch our other videos around guardianship. It'll give you a fuller understanding of what it all means.